Pricing your art. Ugh. It's part math, part alchemy, and a whole lot of emotion. On the easy days, it should just be simple math. The materials needed to make your work cost this much money, plus the amount of time it takes you to make that work, based on an hourly rate of your time that you figure out based on the salary you need to pay yourself. Add in a hearty percentage for taxes and a bit of business operation costs, and voila! Your mug is now $95. Wait, what? I can't charge $95 for a basic mug. Crap. Now what? Try as I might to systematize pricing and just look at the math. At the end of the day, there is always going to be a little bit of emotion factored in. And safely managing that emotion in a way that maintains our mental well-being, particularly as we lead up to the crazy Q4 holiday sales season, is exactly what I'm going to talk about today on this solo episode of The Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 12 years, making a living from what I make, Rebecca Ickes Carra. But wait, before we get started digging into this topic of pricing that probably makes you feel both parts queasy and a little bit excited all at the same time, I just don't want you to forget. The Maker's Playbook is currently sponsored by Amico, which is amazing. You may have noticed that Amico isn't taking direct orders on their website currently, and while that may seem like a bad thing, the reason for it is pretty great. For the past 8 months, Amico has been focusing on supplying their distributors first. In other words, they're focused on making sure that your favorite local shops are supported even before their own website. You can easily pick up your favorite glazes like Potter's Choice Honey Flux or Rainforest Celadon on the shelf of your local clay shop and avoid those extra shipping costs in the process. Naturally, high demand and supply issues have made it hard to keep stores stocked these days, as we all know. But Amico is dedicated to supporting your favorite small businesses first, now, and in the future. And that, my friends, is putting your money where your values are. And you know I'm all about that. If you don't yet have a favorite local shop, you can find an Amico distributor near you by visiting amico.com/dealers. That's plural, dealers with an S. Be sure to show Amico some love on Instagram and tag them as well as me at The Maker's Playbook with a screenshot of your favorite episode from this last month on the podcast. Okay, now, back to that subject you've probably been more than happy to avoid at all costs. I probably could have talked about Amico for a much longer period of time and avoided talking about pricing your work. Last month, our conversation inside of the community, which is our online home for makers who want to keep chatting about the topics we discuss here on the podcast, not to mention problem solve together around this crazy dream of making a living from the things we make. That's what the community is. So if you want to learn more, wipe the mud off your hands right now. Don't wait till the end of the episode. Just hit pause. It's fine. Grab the towel. And go visit makersplaybook.com/community. But anyway, the point. Our conversation last month inside of the community all revolved around pricing. And as is true with so many of the topics we discuss in the community, Instagram, email marketing, website platforms, selling on Etsy, finding your ideal client, the list goes on and on. The topics we discuss are always a little bit more complicated than we'd like them to be. I mean, that's actually why we started the community in the first place. Trying to get meaningful answers from Google or a massive Facebook group on topics like what's the best website platform for makers typically has us all still feeling utterly overwhelmed. Why? Because these questions are more complex than we think. Google doesn't really respond well to complex questions. It works best for, nail salons near me. When it comes to making a living from the things you make, many, many, many questions and business related decisions, like what to price your work, are intertwined. And often that makes the to do list that we've set ourselves feel like it's never actually going to be complete. Why? Because our businesses or side hustles are living and changing entities, just like us. What you need out of a website right now while you're side hustling and working 9 to 5 every day, trying to fit in this work you love on the weekends, is different than what you would need out of a website should you make the leap to go full time. And the same, naturally, is true for pricing. While yes, you should absolutely start out pricing your work with an understanding of the hard costs required to make that work in the first place, and make sure the price at least covers those costs. I'm talking about the cost of your clay, your glazes, the electrical bill for firing a kiln, the payments you have to make to whatever website host you do use, whether it's your own website or Etsy, the percentage you will inevitably lose to credit card processing fees, etc., etc., etc. And then you should add to those costs a reasonable amount to cover your time making the piece. Yes, even though you love what you do and you would make it anyways, even if you weren't getting paid. Those two major items, the hard costs of making your art and the cost of your time to make said art, should be the foundation to the start of pricing anything. But then there's more. Yep. Sorry. Please don't hit skip to the next episode. It's just the way it is. And maybe not sorry. Maybe it's exciting. Maybe you'll look at those hard costs and realize that actually, thanks to the amazing community studio that you get to work out of, it's a manageable number. And if you just sell your mug for $20, you're good to go. But all of your maker friends have told you that $20 is way too low. So now what? How do you set your price if those hard costs are already accounted for? Do you just log on to Etsy or Instagram and click around to see what other potters in your neighborhood are charging? Well, let's be honest. Yes, that's exactly what everyone has been doing. But is it actually helpful? No, not really. Because you don't know if that potter down the virtual street is doing this as a hobby and happy to simply earn enough money to cover the cost of the community studio fees, or if they need to cover the cost of their health insurance premium. And let me tell you, that's a radically different fee. When all we do is crowdsource the internet to guess at what we should price our pieces, we are making this really important decision without the full picture. Who knows why that other person on Etsy is charging $45 a mug? Maybe they also just logged onto the World Wide Web, took a look around, and guessed. And now we're all just guessing. Which means if you are anything like me, when I was just out there guessing, because yes, I have also done this, when someone questions your pricing, when a curious customer who might not be meaning anything bad by it simply asks why your mug costs more than their friend that makes pottery on the side and only charges half the price, well, if you're like me, you start to sweat and you start to feel uncomfortable and awkward. And then you remember you've always hated the idea of sales. You didn't get into this because you wanted to sell to people. You just want to make your work and be able to keep making your work. And this is just so miserable. Let me just discount everything because one person told me it was too expensive, and now I don't feel very confident about my work or frankly myself. But oh crap, now I have to pay taxes on the mugs that I did sell, and that was a lot more money than I thought it was going to be, which means I actually didn't sell enough to cover my community studio fee, so now I can't quit the day job. And, uh, I mean, hypothetically, right? That's just pure hypothetical situation. I'm winking over on this side of the microphone, if it wasn't obvious, my friends. Do you see how interconnected all of these business decisions get? No wonder when you're trying to crowdsource the answers on the internet, it feels like you're just as stuck as before. So, first off, before I get ahead of myself, feeling overwhelmed is not your fault. Trying to learn how to make a living from the things we make can be freaking overwhelming, particularly when we're trying to do it by ourselves with a generic resource like the internet. So, this is where I obviously remind you that we have the community and you can get amazing support from other makers by going over to makersplaybook.com/community. But I digress. Back to pricing. So, let's talk about cost based pricing specifically. That's what I started this whole thing with. Cost based pricing is when you figure out your cost of goods, what it costs to buy clay, glazes, fire the kiln, etc., and add that cost to the cost of our time to determine how much you should charge for any given piece. This is the math based approach to pricing that is pretty straightforward. Or at least it's straightforward once you figure out how many mugs you can make out of one bag of clay and one order of glazes, and if you fill an entire kiln full just of mugs. But you get my point. But if buying a bag of clay costs the same amount for you as it does for the next potter down the street, then why does your cost-based pricing, rather, mean you should sell a mug for $35 and that other potter is selling theirs for $55? And another thing, if we're setting the price of our work partially based on the amount of time it takes us to make the work, then that means my terrible paperweight of a vase from over 12 years ago when I first touched clay, well, I should sell that vase for way more than a vase that I would make today. Because it took me 4 times as long to make that vase 12 years ago. But why would a less skilled piece, or frankly, a less skilled potter, charge more than someone with far more advanced skills? That just doesn't make sense, right? This is where we quickly reach the limitations of solely cost-based pricing and arrive to value-based pricing. And this is where the emotions come back and complicate things. Value-based pricing is subjective and relies on the perceived value of the item being purchased. Values-based pricing is why I wind up with a quote for a new fence that would cost $5,000 from a company that's going to install it for me when I can clearly see that the cost of fence pickets are $3 per picket if I were to buy them from our local big box store and then install them myself. And let me tell you, our yard is not big enough for however many pickets 5,000 divided by 3 is. That fence company with the hefty profit margin knows I value my time above all else and that it would take me 3 times as long to install a fence myself, having never done it before. Values-based pricing is rooted in the mug you made becoming someone's favorite mug. Values-based pricing is where things get intertwined again and a little bit messy. Remember when I mentioned at the beginning of all of this how pricing, as well as other decisions like choosing website platforms or marketing your work, quickly become complex and intertwined? That it can make us feel like we can never simply just check one of these subjects off the to-do list and move on? And how having these complex conversations is why I started the community, which you can learn more about at makersplaybook.com/community. Well, here's how it's all intertwined. Values-based pricing can be greatly successful, and it can provide all of us independent makers and solopreneurs with the much-needed financial margin to do things like setting up an emergency fund or going to a workshop so that you can have new skills or, take a weekend off. Values based pricing is pretty darn crucial for artists. But values based pricing also relies heavily on understanding who your audience is, or at least who you want your audience to be. Maybe it's not your current customers, but it's the customers you know exist and you're working on getting them to see your work and find you in the world. Which also means values-based pricing is wrapped up in how that ideal audience experiences your work. Is it on Etsy, where they can price shop and compare among hundreds, if not thousands, of other quote-unquote giant mugs? Not being able to tell the difference between the slipcast mug being shipped from halfway across the world and made by someone who wasn't being properly paid or taken care of, versus your handmade wheel-thrown mug made by someone who gets 8 hours of sleep at night? Or are they experiencing your work on a custom designed site where you treat them to a unique online experience without any other distractions? Is your ideal audience who has the financial means to pay your values-based price finding your mug at a local farmer's market stall that they can walk to from their neighborhood, and all you had to do was throw up a folding table, set out some mugs in a neat, organized rows, and they walk around the whole rest of the market holding their mug in your hands because you maybe didn't bring packaging material with you? Or is that ideal audience walking into a specially constructed booth with tablecloth colors carefully selected to fit your aesthetic and branded gift bags to fill full of their purchases and free drinks when they walk in the door and I don't know what else? To be clear, while you might be passing judgment on these two options, neither one is better or worse than the other. There is nothing wrong with a simple, easy setup. And there's also nothing wrong with something a bit fancier or more complex. But they are unavoidably different experiences. Think about it this way. Why do I drive out of my way to go grocery shopping at Trader Joe's when there's a Meijer half the distance from my house? Now, I realize grocery stores are highly regional things, so let me explain a little bit about what it's like to walk into these two stores. You should also have the context ahead of time that I hate shopping. It stresses me out, particularly clothes and grocery shopping. It's the bane of my existence, and if I'm being more honest and realistic, I hardly ever do the grocery shopping because Francesco does all the cooking. But hypothetically, if I were to go grocery shopping, now that you know that context, at Trader Joe's, just about everything is a Trader Joe's brand. There are not 20 different options for milk. There's whole milk, 1% and 2%, and then there are a couple of non-dairy options, because Trader Joe's definitely is all about those organic choices. So there's your oat milk and your almond milk and probably some other one I've never heard of. In fact, the entire store is smaller as a whole. And this has been the case in any Trader Joe's I've gone to throughout the country. Chicago, Milwaukee, most recently New York City. They're bigger than the corner quick shop, but smaller than the typical American supermarket. Whereas Meijer is probably big enough to have its own zip code, especially if you count the size of the parking lot. There are options, on options, on options. Where Trader Joe's has half of one side of one aisle for cereal, Meijer has both sides of two aisles. Now, I might be slightly exaggerating here, but I think you get my point. Now, the way I'm presenting these two stores makes my bias obvious. I bet for some of you listening, you will love the convenience of a store like Meijer, because at the end of the day, both stores are selling milk. And in fact, Trader Joe's might actually be slightly more expensive than Meijer. But I'm still buying my milk at Trader Joe's. Why? Because for me, I value the simplicity of shopping there. I value the ease of the experience. Someone else might find the ease of having everything you could possibly imagine under one roof of Meyer. That's the kind of ease that they're looking for in their life. And to make it a bit more intangible, a little bit more complex, I connect and enjoy the vibe at Trader Joe's. Anytime I've been to a Trader Joe's, including in long lines outside, waiting your turn during whatever weather at the height of social distancing in 2020, the Trader Joe's employees always seem to genuinely enjoy their time at work. So, what the heck do aloha shirt wearing grocery store employees have to do with the price of milk? Well, in this example, everything. This is what I mean when I say pricing, along with all of those other business decisions, cannot be decisions we make on their own. They all intertwine. And frankly, we all need reliable support networks to help us see through the entanglement and make clear decisions that are best suited for ourselves and our own unique needs. So, obviously, that's just another reminder to go check out makersplaybook.com/community, if you didn't already guess that. But back to values pricing. It's complicated. But here are some things to consider to set yourself up for success. Values pricing has to be in alignment with the brand experience you are giving your customers. For example, if Spirit Airlines, or Ryanair for anyone listening over in the UK and Europe, if they started charging the same price for their flights as Virgin or Air France, but still had the same budget customer service, I think that I can safely say literally no one on the planet would buy those tickets. We are willing to put up with the ridiculously strict requirements around absolutely no carry-on bags when we are able to snag a plane ticket for $50 instead of $250. But we all should know going into it, it's $50 because no, you are not getting a free pop or a free snack during the flight. No, you can't sneak that overstuffed book bag onto this plane and not pay extra for a carry-on. The experience of a budget airline like Spirit or Ryan is the experience of paying the absolute lowest price you possibly can to get from A to B via an airplane. That's it. That's the experience. If you want the happy employees and funny, humorous pilots and relatively easy to manage customer service, plus your choice of snack in flight, well, you're going to need to pay for that experience alongside the hard cost of the plane ticket and fly with somebody else. Let me put this into a more highly debated example for us makers. Etsy versus your own website. It's not impossible, but it is particularly difficult to charge a premium price for something like ceramics on Etsy. Yes, there are examples of artists on Etsy charging above average for their work, but you see this typically in one of two ways. They are either, number one, making something where there is not nearly as much competition out there, so a really particular aesthetic or maybe uniquely sculptural work that's different. I don't know, just something totally different than anybody else, maybe. Or, number two, more common, they are just using Etsy as a checkout system, and they're actually bringing their own audience to the platform, rather than using Etsy to gather new customers from searching on the platform and finding them. Now, that's a conversation for another day, so let's stick to the values-based pricing point I'm trying to make here right before we dive down the rabbit hole of Etsy. If you want to dive down the rabbit hole, you know where to go to have that conversation. It's the community. So, Let's assume you use Etsy like Francesco and I do to find new customers. We don't have a very large audience at the moment, so it's helpful to have listings on Etsy because 90% of our sales are from people who search Etsy and order from us. They're searching for a particular item, they don't care who they buy it from, but they happen to find us. As opposed to it being from people who, for example, follow us on Instagram and then click the Etsy link and buy from us. The experience of searching and buying something on Etsy is rooted in the experience Etsy wants to give to customers. It's not necessarily the experience we, in the future, when we launch our own website, want Carra to be known for. Etsy's alleged value, and I know that's a hot subject, but just bear with me here. What they say they value is giving the average person access to the world of the handmade. But we're talking like access to the whole world of handmade. The options are utterly endless. And frankly, like buying groceries at Meijer is to me, it's typically overwhelming in the never ending list of options. What do all of those options presented to the unknowing customer who knows nothing about ceramics probably and is just looking for a gift for Father's Day? What do all of those options do to their mind? Well, naturally, they immediately start to compare the price. It's only normal. Listing after listing after listing, you look at a photo and then you look at the price, all lined up next to each other. While Etsy still pitches itself as the website to shop handmade, we all know what a mess the options on there really are. So if you compare that experience to going to a website of a specific brand, for example, let's say East Fork, when you land on eastfork.com, you are in the experience that they specifically want to give you. The photos all coordinate together, unlike the vast array of photo quality present amidst a variety of Etsy listings. You immediately can't help but start thinking about what you value in a piece of pottery, because their homepage, right from the start, points out the importance of durability, community, and caring for others. Oh, wow, I value those things too, your subconscious might say to yourself. And will you check out their commitment to equity and fair wages for employees? Now, all of a sudden, a $40 mug plus shipping seems totally okay. I don't think I need to pull the data to tell anyone how popular, or rather how not popular, a $40 mug plus shipping on Etsy might be. If you've never listed on Etsy, if you've never used it, if you've never gone there, here's a hint for you. Their entire algorithm is built to prioritize listings with free shipping. The point I'm trying to make here. In both scenarios, I am talking about $40 mugs being purchased from websites online. Etsy versus Eastfork. But one place might be a bit harder to sell than others. One might involve a lot more customer messages explaining why something costs what it does. The other gets sold on the black market of eBay for exponentially more than $40 when colors get retired and can no longer be purchased straight from the original website. Eastfork kind of has a cult brand following, with customers lining up for hours to get their hands on discounted seconds. Now that's a big difference between seemingly same items. They're both $40 ceramic mugs. So let me attempt to wrap this all up into something more pragmatic for us to just implement actually in our day-to-day lives of trying to figure out how to make a living from the things we make. Step number 1 for pricing. For all pricing is to first have a solid understanding on the cost-based pricing of your work. It's crucial to make sure you actually can cover your costs as well as buy your groceries from whatever grocery store you choose, especially if you're considering quitting that full-time job and going full-time and making a living from the things you make. Then, once you're consistently selling your work at a price that covers all of those cost-based needs, or hell, even before, if you have the ability to not worry about how much you sell and can just start out with selling at least or not above the cost-based needs, it's time to consider values-based pricing. And values-based pricing brings in the hard to define, beautiful, emotional mess that is perception. But here's the thing most of us forget. Values-based pricing is not based on our own perception. It is not necessarily about how much we value the piece and think it's worth, because we aren't selling to ourselves. Values-based pricing is rooted in your audience's perception of the work. And this is where understanding who your customers are, or who you aspire for them to be, is crucial. As we prepare all of our shop updates and website listings and Instagram posts for the craziness of the holiday shopping season, consider the value of gifts. What is the value of a fruit bowl in just the right trendy color to coordinate with your freshly painted dining room just in time for your first dinner party this holiday season? Well, for an interior designer, that value might be twice as high as you'd expect. For a minimalist looking to downsize their possessions, well, they aren't going to ever buy anything trendy, more than likely. Same bowl, different audience. What is the value of that same fruit bowl when it's gifted to a best friend after they've moved halfway across the world? Feeling a little bit homesick, they open up the mail to find a surprise gift made by someone in their hometown, sent to them from their best friend. After they texted their friend thank you, they get a photo back of a matching fruit bowl on their own best friend's dining room table, intrinsically, physically linking the two friends over the miles of distance. Same bowl, totally different reason to buy than the first two. And now, you might see how I could easily continue along this podcast episode, but talking about the values-based pricing to the importance of discovering your ideal audience. But that's a different subject, so I'm going to stay focused. Otherwise, this podcast episode will be 3 hours long. The reason I wanted to get this episode out into your headphones before the holiday craziness was for a gentle reminder. Pricing, while partially math-based, is also highly emotional. For us as makers, setting the price, it can bring up all sorts of feelings of worthiness, or rather of unworthiness, of fear, of excitement, feelings of hope, feelings of despair. If trying to price your work brings you any or all or even more of these feelings, you are not alone, my friend. That's normal. Give yourself some grace and take breaks as you need. And remember, pricing isn't a fixed thing either. That gallon of milk at Trader Joe's and the Meijer grocery store changes price faster than an Instagram influencer changes their sponsor. My pricing from 12 years ago is not anywhere close to what it is now. Hell, my pricing from a year ago isn't the same as now. And that's okay. I said at the start of this entire episode, many of these decisions we have to make when you're trying to figure out how to make a living from the things we make, they are living and changing entities. Because you are a living and changing being. As you learn more, you'll make changes. That's normal. The price, the number that feels comfortable to you to charge for your mugs today might not be the same number this time next year. Or, hell, even in 3 months. That's okay. You are allowed to make changes. I mean, heck, I didn't even get into the nitty-gritty pricing psychology and being confident in sales. That's a whole other level of pricing we can chat about on another podcast episode. Or, if you're feeling anxious, you don't want to wait, you know what I'm going to say here. You can come have that conversation immediately inside the community and chat about all of this stuff right now. one final word of encouragement when it comes to pricing your work in advance of this holiday season. And it's a little bit random, so I have no smooth segue, but it's an important reminder nonetheless. There will always be someone out there charging less than you. And there will also always be someone out there charging more than you. There is no magical number to set your prices. There is no perfect price where everyone is happy and you will receive no pushback whatsoever. It doesn't exist. For me, what helps the most mentally when it comes to managing all of that is understanding why I charge what I charge, the hard costs I must cover, and also the value I know I bring to the table in helping my customers, in helping our students inside the photography styling course, in helping our community members. All of that has a reason and a purpose. The more I understand my numbers, the more confident I feel in my pricing, the more successfully I can work with my ideal audience. And notice I said ideal audience. I did not say the more successfully I can work with everyone. Not everyone is my or your customer. And that's okay too. At the end of this, regardless of your pricing, you are worthy because you exist in this world and are a beautiful human being. The responses to pricing and the success of our sales is not a reflection of ourselves or our worthiness, but instead a reflection of understanding a complex, multi-layered system that we may or may not have ever had any training or education or practice in. If you're looking for more support and help in navigating these complex systems, sincerely, do please come and check out the conversations happening inside of the community. We currently have over 40 makers from all over the world, newbies and makers a few decades into their career, all extremes. We are all in there problem solving together in order to figure out how the heck to make a living from the things we make. You can learn more at makersplaybook.com/community. And of course, this episode of the Maker's Playbook podcast is sponsored by Amico. You may have noticed that Amico isn't taking direct orders on their website currently. And while that may seem like a bad thing, the reason for it is pretty awesome. For the past 8 months, Amico has been focused on supplying their distributors first. In other words, they're focusing on making sure your local shop is supported before even their own website. And of course, you can easily pick up your favorite glazes like Potter's Choice Honey Flux or Rainforest Celadon on the shelf of your local shop and avoid the extra shipping costs in the process. Naturally, high demand and supply issues have made it hard to keep stores stocked these days. But Amico is dedicated to supporting your favorite small businesses first, now, and in the future. And that, my friends, is putting your money where your values are. You know I'm all about it. If you don't yet have a favorite local shop, you can find an Amico distributor near you by visiting amico.com/dealers. If you loved this episode and found anything at all helpful, be sure to share it on Instagram. It would mean the world to me. Tag me at The Maker's Playbook, as well as Amico at Amico Brent. And now, just even talking about pricing has me feeling equally tired as trying to decide my own prices, maybe a little sweaty. So I think I'm gonna go ply Hendrix for some doggo cuddles before diving into the next item on the to-do list. As always, my friends, until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.